Hello third year historians and welcome to lesson 7 from our Mafia topic. This one we're looking at Mafia families and the hierarchy in a little bit more detail, and our learning intention is to understand the structure of the Mafia family in more detail. We have looked at this already, but just looking at it with more definition of what each of the roles did. Success criteria wise, there's 3 things that we want to do by the end of this lesson. You want to be able to name the different positions within the Mafia family and kind of give an explanation of what they did. You will have researched one of the major crime families that existed in New York at the point in time we are discussing, and you will have practiced a National 5 skills question, a how fully question again for this one, as part of your assignment for this week. So wherever you're doing your notes, put the heading Mafia Families and Hierarchy and start the rest of the lesson. So just as a quick recap, we have already looked at this hierarchy in another couple of our lessons, and we're thinking about the positions that would have existed within the Mafia family. Now, referred to as a family because quite often this would be considered a family business, and you'll hear that term being used in media and things like that. Family business is what the Mafia quite often talked about going into, and this is quite often because it is actually kept within maybe a certain family or an extended family. So you would have people who were the sons, nephews, uncles, cousins and things like that, or even just distantly relatives to the person who was in charge, or one of the other members who would be involved in this particular group. And again, referred to as families because it was these particular families that controlled certain crime business areas within certain places, and we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail. So at the top we've got the boss, okay, the person that is in charge. He is sometimes referred to in media as things like the Don or the head of the family. They're the person that is in charge and makes the final kind of decisions on things. Under him we have the underboss. Quite often this will be a son or the nearest kind of male relative. They're training to try and take over from the boss one day. Quite a lot of authority within the underboss. Underneath them we've got the people who the capo regime, who are often referred to as the capos. Quite a lot of authority and things for them. And they're kind of the ones that have a little bit more responsibility, but not quite as much as obviously the underboss and the boss. Under them you've got the just general soldiers, who are the day-to-day people, the ones that commit most of the crime, and at the very bottom of our hierarchy we've got the associates. The associates tended to be the people who were involved or worked alongside the rest of the family, but were not what was referred to as made men. So they were not always necessarily actually part of the actual family, and this could be because they were not Sicilian, so they did not have that heritage, so they couldn't actually join the family. It could be that they were from another group or another criminal organisation. Could be lots of different things with that. So if we think about why the hierarchy was created, we need to really consider what a hierarchy actually is, and maybe where we've seen it in other places before. So hierarchies are systems where any sort of members of this particular system or an organisation, whatever it might be, are ranked according to how much status or how much authority they have. So in this particular case for the Mafia, the reason that the hierarchy is created is to allow as many people as possible to control a certain area within a family and obviously get involved in the crimes without the wars and things that had been happening during Luciano's time actually spilling over. So the hierarchy helped keep control of what was actually happening within each of these crime organisation groups. Having these levels of authority meant that people had to answer to others, so it kind of helped keep checks and controls of what was going on. It helped to stop overtaking and things happening as much during these kind of things within these hierarchies. So if you have a boss, the boss is in charge and they have people under them that are loyal to them, it means it's less likely for some other part down at the bottom of the hierarchy to decide they're going to take over. So the hierarchy helped control the crime. So when we talk about the mafia in the US in particular, the main thing that has started to develop through Prohibition and through people like Al Capone and Lucky Luciano is this idea of organised crime. So it's not just random acts of violence, it's organised and it is there for a reason. So these groups, each one of them, has an important role to play, and each one needs to complete that role for the rest of the whole thing to actually work. If we're looking at it with actual people, we've got another role that we can add in, which is the consigliere, which is this guy here. He is the advisor to the boss and the underboss. A lot of responsibility for that bit there. So basically in our mafia hierarchy, the whole thing is about the distribution of wealth and profit from each of the things that they are trying to do, whether it be racketeering, whether it be gambling, whatever type of particular crime they are involved with. So the money all comes in from the people at the bottom. The associates and the soldiers are the ones that make the money. Part of their money they get to keep. If you're an associate, you are paying off some debt or some expenses, as it was referred to the soldiers. Their money is then paid off in the same way to the capos who are above them, and they get a small share of the profit. The capos then have to pay their money to the underboss, again taking a small share of the profit. The underboss and the consigliere take some of the money, and the majority of the money then goes to the boss. So it ends up with all of the kind of money they have made through their various criminal activities going up through the chain, so that the main person who is actually getting the money from this is the boss of the family. Now, quite often this is really a very unfair system, if you are an associate especially, or you are the soldiers at the bottom and maybe even the capos, because this group here are the ones that are doing the majority of the legwork and the work to make this money, whereas the ones at the top are the ones really just making the decisions and keeping things going. So it's not a fair distribution of wealth through this hierarchy. Depending on which status symbol you have will depend on how much money you actually make. And what we sometimes see portrayed in films and things like that are the soldiers or even the capos, more likely to be the capos, being offered better positions, or the soldiers being offered a capo position within someone else within the family if they were to take charge. So we have kind of hostile takeover stories and things like that happening. So the point is, within this hierarchy, it's not actually always fairly distributed. The mafia generally worked like any business did. So this means that the people at the top usually made the most money, as they were seen to be making all of the big decisions, so that was justified, and the ones at the bottom were often working harder, following the instructions of orders of other people, and doing most of the legwork. So it was very much a business. When they refer to it as a business, that is the way that it was organised. Organised crime for these people at this point in the US was a business. So first task that you're going to do in your jotters, you're going to make a copy of this diagram. It doesn't have to be exactly like this. You could print it if you wanted, or you could trace it so you can see each of the groups. You could just write the names of the groups like this. You could try and draw it, or you can just draw it as bubbles, whatever is easiest for you. You're going to make a copy of this diagram. Make sure you use the heading Mafia Hierarchy as well, and then you're going to use the next slide to fill in more details about each of the roles within this group. So, as we said before, each of these roles have a particular set of responsibilities and things. You're going to add to your diagram to make it look a little bit more like this one, with information about each particular group. You maybe want to use different colours so that it stands out a little bit for each of them, so you can see what each one was. So if we start at the top, we have the boss, or the Don, as we talked about, who was the leader of the organisation. On the other side here, we have the consigliere, who is basically the counsellor, the advisor, tends to be a trusted friend and a confidant. Normally they become the number 3 man in the family, so they are the third most powerful person within this group. This particular role was introduced by Luciano when he introduced the commission in 1931. Up to this point it had existed in some ways, but it tended not to be something every family had, and it wasn't particularly well organised. Okay, so this gave them more of a say in what was actually happening and more responsibility and authority over the rest of the group. So the number 2 position then is the underboss. Okay, second in command. It tends to be a family member, such as a son, who is basically being groomed to take over the family business one day. In the middle here we've got the capos. They are ranking members, okay, made men, which we'll come back to in a second, of a family who basically lead the crews of soldiers. In a lot of ways, if we think about it in a military fashion, the capo is similar to a military captain who is commanding the soldiers underneath them. So at the bottom here we have the last 2 groups, the soldiers, also known as the made men or a made man. The soldiers are the lowest members of the crime family, but they have a lot of respect within the organisation. You can only be a soldier if you are a made man, which we've referred to 3 times now, which pretty much means that you have to take an oath of silence and an oath of loyalty to the family, so that you will never, if you are caught and charged or put to prison or anything like that, you will never actually reveal any information about the family at all. Quite often it would be a requirement that to be a made man and a particularly accepted member of a crime family, you had to have committed your first murder. And that was a rite of passage that the mafia families, not always did, but quite a lot of the time did, in order for you to become a made man. So you could not be a member of the mafia until you were a made man, and you could not go up through the ranks if you were not a made man either. So you quite often could start off as a soldier and then you could become a capo. It was unlikely that you would ever be an underboss unless you were maybe like the second son of the boss, or even the third son. You were way down here and some really awful things happened to each of them above you, so that you ended up going up the chain. At the very bottom you have the associates, who were part of the crew but they were not made men. They committed crimes and had the protection or the direction of the family, but they were not members of the family itself. They did get a lot of money from this, but they did have to pay quite a significant chunk of it to the soldiers or the people above them, who were the superior ranking people to them. So this is each of the groups. Make a copy of the diagram, make sure that you write down all of the information for each of the levels. Make sure you maybe use different colours, make it look interesting. Pause the video and then come back at roughly about 13 minutes and 30 seconds to complete the next task. Just as a quick kind of bit of information, this man here you can see pictured is referred to as Jimmy Burke. He was an associate within a mafia family and goes on record as being one of the few associates that actually we know a lot of information about. If you were an associate within a mafia family, you could still make quite a lot of good money. Burke was part of the Lucchese family from New York, which we're going to look at in a minute, and was one of the most feared and successful gangsters in New York, even though he was not a member of the mafia family and was not a made man. But because he was of Irish descent and not an Italian descendant, he could never grow any further within the hierarchy. He had to stay at the associate level. As time goes on and he becomes obviously older and he becomes more respected, he becomes kind of like a chief of associates, which is like an associate that obviously has more respect and authority, even in a lot of ways than some of the actual made men did, who were maybe new to the mafia family, but he could never go up the ranks because of this reason. and it was very unlikely that anyone would ever make an exception for this particular thing. Interestingly, the film Goodfellas, which is a mafia film, talks about Jimmy Burke's life, but they didn't have permission to use his name, so it is a slightly different character, but it's based on the kind of the same premise of someone from a lower ranking area and his involvement in the hierarchy. So these are our crime families and our original Mafia Commission people from Luciano's group. They ruled New York and some other places with an iron fist, and today quite often a lot of the Mafia families are still descendant from them. But within New York itself there were a few main Mafia families. So for your task this week, you're going to complete a research task on one of New York's 5 families, the major ones that dominated the organised crime scene within New York are listed here. So I want you to pick one, doesn't matter which one, okay, pick the one that jumps out at you, and you're going to research online to create a short PowerPoint presentation. It needs to be at least 5 slides, including a cover slide and a bibliography. So you have to have a cover slide which has the name of your crime family and some photos. You need to have a bit of information about who they are, maybe what they got up to, any interesting bits of information you can find about them, and then you need to have a bibliography slide which just has all of the links of information of where you actually found the information out about them. So put a copy of the web addresses or any of the books or things you might find on Google Books or whatever it might be into a slide like that as well. So this means that you have 3 slides of information and your cover and your bibliography to do. You can add more than that if you want. Okay, we're looking for information as well as images. Okay, and you're only doing one crime family, so pick one, research it, and once you've finished your PowerPoint, upload it to the assignment tab on the team. Last task for this presentation is a National 5 Inquiry Skills Practice question, which is a how fully question. Now, these are the ones that we use the mnemonic aid to help us actually write. So we're writing an answer for A, we're saying the things that the source includes for I, and then some things that the source doesn't include for D. So it's asking you how much the source describes the roles within the Mafia family. So you read the source and you're looking for 3 things that the source says and 3 things that the source doesn't say. You might structure your answer a little bit like this. So you have your opening sentence, which you need, which is your A. So you would write this sentence in. Source A is quite full in describing the roles within the Mafia family. Source A describes the roles within the Mafia family to an extent, but not totally. It's entirely up to you with what you decide to do here. You then need 3 things that the source includes, and that's our I in aid. So you're going to start it by saying the source says, and we just quote it. Okay, so put the quote. The source also says, and we put another quote, and finally the source says, and we put a final quote. However, source A misses some key details, and then you're going to tell me 3 things that the source doesn't say that you know from your research or from your diagram on the Mafia family that we could add in. And if you can add examples from any other lesson, so you could say, for example, Lucky Luciano, okay, that's fine, or Al Capone, and that's absolutely fine as well. Add in any 3 things that it doesn't say. Don't do this like the source doesn't say anything about the capos, and then don't say anything yourself. You need to tell me something. So it doesn't say anything about the capos, who were more respected than the soldiers and were almost like captains within the family, something like that. Okay, so 3 things that the source includes, 3 things that it doesn't include. So answer the question, 3 things the source includes, 3 things the source doesn't include, and submit your answer for this one to the team. Any questions or anything you need help with, don't hesitate to ask your teacher, put a message in the team, or send an email and ask for a little bit of help.